When you start fly fishing, there's an awful lot to learn before you can actually go fly fishing. Now, it's not a huge barrier to entry, but it does really help to have someone just explain it simply, and that's what I'm going to start doing in this new series on YouTube. First of all, fly rods. In this video, we're going to cover what do fly rods do, what are the numbers that are associated with them, and what are all these terms and phrases that come along when buying a fly rod. Let's chat about fly rods and what rod might suit you best and why. So, let's start at the very start. A fly rod is obviously the main thing when fly fishing. This is the thing that you hold, that holds your reel, which holds your line, that you can then cast out to catch fish with. Now, a fly rod can be anything from super brittle and super hard to being soft and very dainty. But those numbers can sometimes be confusing, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video today. So here in my hand, I have my favorite rod, my Orvis Helios 2, and we're going to talk about some of the numbers on here and what they mean. So the length of the rod is one that's quite important and that some people actually get wrong at the start. Now, when you're first starting out, you might think that 9 foot is very long and that's too long for your rod. But in actual fact, 9 foot is on the shorter end of rods that I would use, personally, fishing on large lakes and lochs here in Scotland. Now, 9 foot on a river, however, is okay. That for a lot of people is fine. But here's what to know. The length of the rod just simply means that it's either longer, easier to cast longer lines because your fly line is higher in the air. So you can cast longer, further with a longer rod. So if you get a very short rod and you're struggling with casting, that can sometimes just be because you've got a short rod. So the length of rod I would always recommend for a new start would be a 9'6" or a 10 foot, to be honest. This rod that I've got here is a 10'7" weight. Now we're going to come on to weights in a minute, but the 10 foot aspect of this is what I would use for all of my competition rods and for fun fishing rods on still waters and large lakes, because that 10 foot gets me the distance that I want with my casting. Much easier. Not to say that you can't cast far with shorter rods, but it is certainly easier when you're a beginner to cast further with a longer rod. So 10 foot is what I go for. Now, let's talk about the weight. You see here that it says 7 weight line. Now, 7 weight just means that this is an arbitrary number of 7 that goes up in a scale from 1 all the way through to 14, 15. Now, that just refers to how brittle and how strong the rod is. When I say brittle, I mean its actual stiffness rather than brittle, sorry. But the stiffness of this rod is much more than that of a 3 or a 4 weight rod, which is much more soft. So it's quite simple to understand that as you go up in the weights of rods, that means that the stiffness of the rod is higher, is more. So 7 weight just simply means that its stiffness is equal to that of the number 7 on that scale. And 7 is quite high in actual fact. 7 is up there with those competition rods fishing for larger trout. I've caught trout on this rod all the way up to 20 pounds plus, and that's both at sea and in fresh water. So this can deal with some pretty chunky fish, and it's very fun for even fish all the way down to 2 pounds. So if you've got 2 or 1 pound fish that fight hard, 7 weight line still means that it's fun. 7 weight rod, sorry. That's also the same as a line, which we'll come on to in the next video when we cover these. But 7 weight rod is pretty a good standard. You can also go for a 6 weight or a 6-7 weight. As long as you're in and around the number of a 7, you'll be able to cast out pretty far and handle fish very easily when you first start off. Now, 10 foot 7 weight, that's a good mix. That's actually my favourite standard of rod. That's what I fish with all the time, pretty much. Unless I'm fishing small rivers. Now, rivers is different in terms of the weights of rods. You want to be using a smaller, daintier rod when fishing nymphs and small dries for much smaller fish. Now, that weight of line and weight of rod means that you can have fun fishing for smaller fish and also present your flies much more softly with a lighter weight of line and a lighter weight of rod. So if you're going to be fishing small rivers, I would maybe suggest going with a 3 or a 4 weight rod and line setup. So that's what the weight means, just simply the stiffness and how heavy your rod is when casting and fishing. Now, the flex. You'll see here that it says tip flex. That is pretty much every rod that is made. Now, modern rods are mostly fast action tip flexes, and that just means that most of the stiffness stops about halfway up to the tip of the rod. So you've got a 3-foot section at the top of the rod that's much more flexible than the rest of the rod. That just means that when you're casting, the main bit of strength that you're getting from your rod is from the bottom 9 foot, or sorry, the bottom 7 foot of your rod. If the top 3 foot are quite flexy, the bottom 7 foot is where you're getting a lot of strength when casting. Now, if you have a mid-flex rod, the rod's going to be much more delicate, much more bendy. And if you're fishing something that's more delicate like that, it can often be quite difficult to land a bigger fish. Now, if you're fishing with heavy line or you're wanting to cast far, that's the same. It's difficult to cast very far or to cast with strength and through wind with a mid-flex rod. And tip flex really gives you that power and that strength going through wind or cast a long weight of line with a tip flex rod. So tip flex is always the types of rods that I fish. If you feel like you can have a bit more fun or you want to fish a mid-flex rod, by all means go for that more delicate mid-flex, but it's important to know that mid-flex is very different to a tip flex and is quite unusual to fish anything other than a fast action tip flex rod, especially on lakes and lochs for trout. Now, when it comes to the rest of the aspects of rods, i.e. its colour, the eyes, the type of handle, the reel seat, all of these are accessory to me and they're just really your preference. So there's no real change in how you cast with the type of handle. Here, I have a pretty standard cork handle that's really old and needs replaced. But this just fits in your hand like so, like you're shaking someone's hand. And that is my favourite type of handle. If you want to fish with a different type of handle, then that's okay. You can fish whatever type of cork handle you fancy, and it doesn't change how the rod works in any way. So just know that if you're being sold a cork handle and it says that it's going to make your casting action better or the rod better in some way, that's a bit of bullshit. The cork handle doesn't matter whatsoever. It's just personal preference. So choose whatever you like. Try a few out in the shop, wherever you're at. Try out cork handles and see how you like them. Now, for the reel seat, anything that isn't metallic is normally a bit of a red flag. If it has any sort of plastic in here or a sponge, then it can sometimes be a little bit flimsy. I have a Temu rod right next to me that has a full aluminium seat. That rod cost like 11 quid. So in reality, it doesn't have to be expensive to be good because that reel seat's fine. But just know that when you're getting a reel seat, you want it to have 2 levels of tightening here. This tightening and then this one beneath it, because this keeps it secure. You don't want to have your reel constantly moving when you're fishing. So just make sure that your reel seat is fairly able to deal with a reel on top of it without this moving at the bottom, because that would be incredibly annoying. Apart from that, that's fly rods. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments and let's have a chat about fly rods in the comments in general. I want to hear what your favourite brands are, what's your favourite style. If anyone doesn't like a tip flex, that'd be super interesting to know, because all I've ever fished is tip flex. So in this series, we're going to cover lines, reels, flies. We're going to go through absolutely everything for the beginners, because I've had an awful lot of comments and chatted to a lot of you guys that want to just have some more general content on the gear. So this is going to be the gear series. Thanks very much, guys. Tight lines, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheerio. Now, if you want to grab yourself any of the flies in this video or any other fly tying and fly fishing materials, go and check out My Fishing Flies in Grangemouth or on their website, myfishingflies.com. They have loads of stuff from loads of flies, everything you could ever need. Go and check them out. Really high quality stuff, and Dale and Tracy are lovely. They'll help you out. Thanks, guys.